1984 from Bharesh College. He practiced in subordinate courts in Western UP for about 16 years, and on creation of Uttarakhand State in 2000, so he started practicing in Nainital High Court as well. On 19th March 2013, he was designated as senior advocate by Uttarakhand High Court, and after being designated as senior advocate, he shifted his base of practice to Supreme Court. And at present, he is Additional Advocate General of UP at Supreme Court. He is associated with Jammu Kashmir Study Center, and at the time of repeal of Article 370 and Article 35A by central government, he was the head of the legal team of JK Study Center. Sir is also associated with Akhil Bharatiya Adhivakta Parishad, Vidya Bharati, and Bharatiya Bhasha Andolan, and Panchanan Shodh Sansthan, and many others. Now I would like to invite Sri R. Venkatramani sir to address the session.
My dear students and other than students, and my dear friend, why do we need to talk about temples at all? And why do we need to talk about government control? And why do we need to talk about control of only individuals? Is it because we are uncomfortable with government control, and government control only respects of Hindu place of worship? Or because we see something very sinister which is happening by reason of a long governmental and state intervention in what I understand is the soul of the nation. When it is the soul of the nation, I understand that this country, like several civilizations across the world, has something to be proud about, in the sense it has been the birthplace of large number of philosophical, religious, cultural ideas and traditions. And while it is the birthplace of all of them, it has never been a colonial venture. It has received and has given as much as it has received. And that's the great beauty of the birth, the place of birth of several world significant thoughts and ideas. And therefore consider at some point of time in this country, thousands of years ago, when, forgetting for a minute about what historians tell us about what happened in the country, we keep hearing about what either Max Muller brought about on the distortion of Indian historical features, and somebody else much later got on that. And we see the effect of all that distorted historical leadings about our country. And that's one aspect we need to keep in mind. And that's closely related to why government and state wants to keep on engaging in the control on Hindu place of worship. While many of you who would not have probably read as much as I would like you to read about the glorious past of our country, particularly in the context of the fact that today we are emerging into a globally powerful nation. How do we bridge the past and the future? How do we ensure that a proper understanding of the past will be a great guide to lay down roads, pathways to the future? And it's a greater task. And it's often said that when we do not know our history, we do not know where to go. So, a very important and correct understanding of history is a surer guide for us to be safe, to be able to navigate our thoughts on non-violent and non-coercive basis, which are very important values of life. So therefore, we need to keep all that in mind when talking about places of worship. When some of us began to engage ourselves in the task of understanding this control, government control of Hindu place worship, I personally began to look at not merely the history, but occasionally I look at what's happening in some of the European countries. Like many of you are aware, as look at the history, Hungary was like Soviet Russia, a former communist country. And the Hungarian constitution then proclaimed itself to be an agnostic, an atheist state. Thereafter, Hungary has taken a new avatar. It is no longer an atheist state. And if you care to look into what happened in many of those satellite countries or parts of Soviet Russia or the East European bloc, the great place of worship, particularly Christian place of worship, were beautifully built churches and what they contributed to cross-cultural interaction in Europe. So during early Soviet era, many of them were sought to be destroyed. But some saner, thoughts prevailed even in Soviet Russia that we go to a place like St. Petersburg or some of those interesting places, the churches are still preserved. And walk across many of the European countries. The place of worship brought into being even while Islam and Christianity were fighting against these. We all know about the War of Crusades. We all talk about the 300-year war between Islam and Christianity in Europe. Notwithstanding all that, those places of worship in Europe, whether it belongs to Islam or Christianity, are a great place of heritage, and they are spokespersons of history. They speak about what happened in the past. So I think that for a place of worship, whichever religion it belongs, tells us something about the past and why we need to connect to the past. And if Hungary thought it's better to come back to a non-atheist state, and look at what's happening in Hungary today, a great resurgence of moving towards, let's say, Orthodox Christianity. If you're a firm believer in a Marxist or a left liberal point of view, you may have nothing to do with all this. You may say all that human beings need a rational, discourse. And out of rational discourse, you will find happiness. We must pursue our happiness. Merely through rational discourse, our country began the journey other way around. Our country was sages, was saints, and great leaders, and even contemplative times. You look at a person like Sri Aurobindo. When he wrote a book called The Secret of Vedas, he went deep into the question as to whether Vedas are symbolic or you take it as a literal, face value. You must plunge into it to find out why Vedas has a research, or treasure into themselves. So our country told us that a mere rational discourse is not the route to the real pursuit of real happiness. So something else is required. And that's where the drive of the mind into the realms beyond the mind, as they call it. How do you go beyond the mind? Not to rational discourse. Swami Vivekananda spoke about it very often and trying to bridge the old and the new. If you look at his great address in New York, in USA, you will find that he will create a foundation for a large number of people are talking about. So I consider therefore the soul of this country is in laying deep foundation, that's the power. Human beings can pursue real happiness, and what that real pursuit of happiness can be. And place of worship did not evolve as if some architects wanted to build something. There's a long history beyond the place of worship in our country. Today, archaeological discoveries across the country, whether it's the deep south or in some parts of northern India, tell us that we are only getting glimpses of what might have happened 5,000 years ago. And when the glimpses tell us there's already been an attempt, individual lives in community, to the larger forces kind of mediators. Look at all that. All of them were pursuing something very deep, embedded, deeply embedded in our mind and psyche and in our culture. So the very part of building a place of worship means to be able to wean people away from your daily pursuits and material pursuits and to give you a place where you can make yourself free from the other pursuits of life. It requires a science. It's not really a architect and lawyer. Your science is deeply rooted in understanding and connecting the entire cosmos. So how does physics work? So today if you ask modern physicists, people working in quantum physics, in quantum mechanics, so interestingly you will find a lot of people are talking about a string theory. And if you ask the physicists what is string theory, they are going to pass 100 before they can give any answer. So why I am talking about it is, well, there is a whole range of science involved, a whole range of connections involved in the evaluation of place of worship in our country. And therefore there is a soul. And if the soul is thought to be touched slowly or brandished over a period of time, there is something which is to be looked at very seriously. I am not talking constitutional law. I want to understand that whether law says that or not, whether the constitution says that or not, is absolutely immaterial. For a civilization to be firmly launched forever in its moorings, and that no external conspiracies or external thought process or ideologies would be in a position to weaken this, then we sit on other issues. We are talking that of a civilizational value, and if suppose today all of us constitute a Constituent Assembly, if we are today the Constituent Assembly and we are called upon to draft a constitution and look at what guarantees we ought to give to us and the rest of the country, I will say that, well, equality is important, but sometimes it can be a mirage. So you will find that when the Assembly drew a whole chapter on right to religion, many criticisms are laid about the way the Constitution was drafted. We had borrowed a large number of principles from Western constitutional ideas, or so on and so forth, and therefore somewhere it missed the roots of a culture, civilization, history, etc. Whether the right or wrong need not detain us now. But I only want to share with you some seminal thoughts that if a place of worship in any part of the world, and more particularly in a country like India where it has a certain science and philosophy and also connections, I think it's important that we set it as the most important part of our life. While in urban life today, a temple means just a fleeting place of worship to just lay down your worries in the altar of God. But that's not what exactly we're talking about temples and the common control. You go to any part of southern part of India, a huge temple is built with large amount of thinking and ideas, and the time spent and the visions that went behind that. You only have to sit there for a few minutes and inhale the whole mystic behind all this. So you should look at the larger picture. Forget about the small little temple buildings, urban conglomerates, the high-rise buildings. You have a nice place. No problem. We are talking about the other parts of a place of worship. The Constitution says, well, all religions have the equal right to faith. Constitution also says you can propagate your faith. If you go to United States, a 300 years of constitutional history, and with its moorings on what happened again in Europe, the division between the church and the state. So, by way of digression, I must tell you, one of the constitution makers, Thomas Jefferson, he said to have looked into a very interesting thing called Genghis Khan to understand what is the equality of faith. A recent book on Genghis Khan and the quest for God talks about how Thomas Jefferson borrowed ideas from Genghis Khan. Very strange. Maybe it's true. So in USA, the church versus state has necessarily come in because in Europe, the church, while trying to dominate everything about life, it fell into division. You have all kinds of divisions in the Christian church. We're not going to talk about that. It may happen to any religion. If you look at our own religious traditions, from Advaita to Vaida to Vishishvaita, and so on and so forth, all kinds of sampradayas, paramparas, you will find a beautiful agglomerate of people who want to think the way they want to think, but never in paths of hatred of each other. So the church and the state division in USA is necessarily rooted in European history. So the church shall not dominate the state, nor the state shall have anything to do with the church. But today, you will find a large number of issues that have come before the US Supreme Court. The entire dialogue about church and the state, or the state and the church, is taking, new turns, largely because the appeal of the Christian religion, what it had probably 100 years ago, the appeal it had over human minds in the Western world is slowly waning. So people start writing about how certain religions are almost weaning in their appeal to human mind. In that context, the US constitutional history is taking a different turn. We don't need to look at that at all. We need to create our own history. And we need to create our own history in the sense, whatever constitutional legal traditions have come to the rest of the world, we will look at them and say we create our own understanding of what is healthy for the most appropriate pursuit of life by all free human minds. I think that in that context, 100 years, both during colonial rule and under our own freedom, free country, Hindu place of worship have come under large amount of control. One can do interesting research on why that happened. It may be an objective way to say that we will not get into that today. But it's also important to know why it happened. As I said, unless we know why it happened, we do not know proper solutions. So we didn't know why it happened. Somebody will tell us before, during the colonial period, it happened because the colonial masters wanted to have it one way, ensure that Christianity spread fast, and to denigrate Hindu religion and all its faith. That's one way of looking at it, maybe to some extent. Many of you probably would read Rajiv Malhotra's book on Breaking India. So when you begin to read that book, couple of now almost 8-9 years now since the book has been published. So I keep looking at whether what was stated in the book has really happened. I think it's happened. So therefore it's important to know why it happened during the colonial period and why it is continuing to happen in a free country like India, despite constitutional provisions which say that the government or the state shall have nothing to do with any religion. Since the pervasive control has grown in relation to Hindu place of worship, very often you find people now engaging in a discourse saying, why only Hindu place of worship? Why not other religions? I think sometimes it can be a wrong question, but the moment it becomes a rhetoric, we fail to really look at the real problem. Therefore, we must focus our attention on why in a free country, despite constitutional schemes, Hindu place of worship continue to come under government control. And what does it mean to us today? And you have to listen to larger number of people who have a pro-government control view. They may have something to say. They look at human nature can never be trusted. If you are in the management of a college, an institution, or a temple for that matter, human nature, when it's bad, it's bad. If you earn, it's wrong. So merely because you are a trustee of a temple, you don't become holier than you are trustees of colleges and institutions. Therefore, if there is a wrong thing happening in temples, who will control it? Who will set it right? Only government. Easy logic, simple logic. But then what happens, while it is true or not, is also an important question to be addressed.
But what has happened is you go to a state like Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or Andhra Pradesh. Tamil Nadu has about 38,000 temples, big, small, tiny, huge, right? And Karnataka has another some 25,000 temples. Andhra has the equal number of temples. And catching on from what the colonial masters thought, it was convenient for a pre-Indian thinking also to say that we need to have some kind of control on temples to ensure that people have faith in place of worship. That is the argument which has been developed over a period of time. So state has come in to be a facilitator and to ensure that people continue to have their faith by ensuring that nothing wrong happens in temples in place of worship. I am not very clear whether in terms of constitutional logic or any other logic, this argument can be perpetrated forever. This argument needs to be closely addressed. But if you look at what happened after governments have taken over control of large number of temples, if you look at legislation in Andhra Pradesh, it says government shall appoint officers to take over management of them. It's nothing like a reason to declare. You can simply appoint. So once in the past 40, 50 years, temples have been taken over by government. Two important things have happened. All temples, big or small, sustain themselves on the endowments which have been handed over to them. I have one small acre of land and I sustain myself as a temple. You take away, but I think maybe one of the Shakespearean plays, it says, you take away my source of livelihood and take away my life. It is quoted in Supreme Court judgment in Olga Tellis. So, the source of sustenance of temples, it has again a very beautifully arranged, organized arrangement. Your people who are dedicated entirely to do worship in temples, by whatever name you call them, it's not important. Whether you call them Brahmins, absolutely not important. So people who dedicate their lives for being part of a system, and they don't look at something else. And people who are able to support the entire structure, whether an artisan or an agriculturist, the entire system is now sought to be slowly destabilized. So the support structure by way of properties and resources are being either lost or the resources that should be managed from this are not made available. And you will find that large amount of studies which have taken place show that over a period of time this continues. Many temples we just simply like a plant dies because of lack of water or a good amount of air or a soil. So the entire support structure, which is so well organized and systematically thought about, is now under great attack. And it will pitch. And once the support structure goes, the superstructure goes. Everything goes. And there are a number of temples in southern India which have been taken over by the Archaeological Survey of India. They become like heritage centers, but without being place of worship. They are places where, like stone structure, but without the soul, doesn't exist there. That's what would happen if we close our eyes to understanding the very idea of a temple as a place of worship, much beyond a physical space. So let's start thinking that a temple is not a mere physical space, it's something beyond that. And then what are we going to do? And why should we talk about it? What are we going to do and what difference does it make to our culture and our civilization? If you think it's going to make a difference to our culture, our civilization, and the obligation on each and every one of our shoulders to continue to transmit the better and the glorious elements of our past to the future. And how do you go about doing that? So we have to ask all these questions very dispassionately, objectively, but at the same time in a committed way, not superficially. When you do it superficially, then into rhetoric, then you enter into all kinds of divisive politics. I think you must avoid divisive politics. You must get into an important understanding of what this would mean for a country in the future. regardless of other religion. It does not make a difference at all. We did not get into all kinds of other arguments as to what will happen. Hindu place of worship disappear, and some other place of worship come. That's an entirely different argument altogether. Well, I just want to also briefly catch up with you, a few stray thoughts, but connected to what I'm trying to convey to you. The Constitution says that every one of us has the right to practice our faith on an equal basis, and also the right to propagate. Now, why did the Constitution say the right to propagate? You know, in our country, even during the Vedic period, or go down deep to the south, you will find that either the Charvakas or any school of atheist thought or a non-agnostic thought, they had their own faith. Nobody called them heretics and then tried to eliminate them. Little skirmishes here and there would have always been there. So different schools of thought, different ways of looking at life, different contributions to how we lead our life, they've all subsisted in the country without being decimated. And that's the beauty. So when Constitution says you have a right to propagate, why didn't it make that right at all? And what has that made, what has that brought into the debate on government control and then on Hindu place of worship? I personally think I want to look at the whole constitutional idea of propagation as close as possible. I keep looking into it. I keep reading what's happening in the rest of the world. So propagation means what? And you have a beautiful idea in your mind today. You sit in contemplation, whether you are a mathematician or a physicist or a scientist, some nice idea comes to your mind. And these ideas are not to be kept in a closet. And if they are good, they have to be shared with the rest of the world. Anything profound, all literature which is beautiful appeal, no? They are all things which need to be shared with the world, whether it is Kalidas or Shakespeare. They are emanations of ideal thought process of a mind. And the ones they are shared, and the joy in sharing is part of propagation. The joy in sharing is part of propagation. And propagation, therefore, must end with the joy in sharing. Suppose I have higher levels of faith, and I tell you, you go to the Himalayas, all of you, I don't know how many of you have heard about a lot of mythical stories in Tibet or Nepal about a place called Shambhala. A lot of literature written about that. There is some ideal place living somewhere in the Himalayas, deep in the Himalayas, not accessible to any one of us, but where life is ideal, lovely, beautiful. There is no sorrow, no pains. So when you talk of such kind of mythical ideas, what appeals to us is that the higher levels of the reach of the mind, and when each and every one of us can lean on the shoulders of the other and say, yes, my pain is your pain and my joy is your joy. And there's a kind of beauty in sharing. So propagation meant only there are higher elements of experiences, share them. But to go beyond that and to say my religion is superior, I begin to compare religions, then propagation becomes a very weak, dimension even in the constitutional scheme. And somewhere or the other, over a period of time, state control has probably facilitated, state control of Hindu place of worship has facilitated certain other, faiths to begin to denigrate Hindu faith. Added to that, of course, there are all kinds of left ideologies which can say that Hindu faith is nothing noble. It is caste-based, it is hierarchically based, and therefore there is nothing noble in it. Therefore, nothing noble in it, why bother with it? So we have, therefore, in the midst of all these kind of ideological debates and divisive discourses, we need to look at why the Hindu place of worship, whether we call it a Hindu place of worship or not, being so important as a treasure house for human life itself, why we need to look at it. And that's why I'm not going to talk to you about what is Article 25 and 26 and what can we do. That requires a large amount of intense debate. The debate is going on in the country. Several people and organizations are engaged in it. And but probably as students of law or any other students of political science also, you can look at how state intervention is has become an evil in itself as far as place of worship. And I would urge all of you to deeply engage yourself in this understanding, this focus and study, and then try to find out, both as a community and persons belonging to the community, as civil society, and as custodians of law, and also find answers to the constitution and the laws. So all that requires a large amount of, devotion to the whole entire subject. And I appeal to all of you, let us gather our minds, generate that devotion, and keep talking about it. And then, as much as, like a ripple effect, as much as we can spread ripples of our thought process, then we would have done. I would certainly love to talk to you about what is happening in India on this freeing Hindu place of worship from government control. There's Swami Dayananda Saraswati was a visionary, and he set up a Hindu Acharya Dharma Sabha. And this organization has taken up some issues with Supreme Court, and they're going around holding a large number of meetings across the country and trying to gather both public opinion, public thoughts, and public commitments on this. And I think fundamentally all that means that how is that each and every one of us declare ourselves as custodians, individually and collectively as custodians of our national heritage and faith and culture. And that's a question to be asked. And there's a commitment to be given. But as I said, I don't propose to go into any further details on constitutional schemes. We can certainly talk about it. And but my own take is, I refer to Hungary, I keep looking at some of those issues, examples. My own understanding is the soul, who said that? If the soil loses the salt, then what remains in the soil? So therefore we are talking about the soul of this country. The soul of this country, which is inalienable and an integral part of our life. How to ensure that the soul doesn't fly away, distant planets across the universe. It must remain on this planet. It must remain with us and continue to, be as part of our life. And that's why I thought I'd come and share my little thoughts with you in the afternoon. I am open to questions later. My attention is waiting here. Let him also share his thoughts with you and we'll pick up some questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for providing such an impactful point of view on the topic. Now, I would like to invite Shri Ravindra Rao, sir, to speak on the topic.
Having heard Venkatamani Sai, what he said today, in fact, what we does in a temple, why we need a temple. So, it's beyond mind. It connects you with some supernatural thing. So ultimately at the end of the day, when you call it a day, whatever the balance sheet you have in your life, losses and profits, you ultimately want someone to forgive you. did not deal with the constitutional aspect of religion or temple. He just referred to Article 25 and 26 and said that we will debate continuously, the country will go on debate, the citizenry will debate on this aspect. What is the constitutional framework available to the country so back to Article 25 and 26 and other articles, relevant articles on this aspect. Think India set the agenda how to get out of the state control over the temple. The constitutional makers grappled with this thought when they were deliberating on the constitution. There are different provisions of the constitution. When they created the idea of human and the centrality of the constitution, then it was found that the life of a human being is so much influenced by religious and cultural factors that, and its life is so much regulated by religious aspects. So, where is the common thought? What is the value of the constitution? How it will regulate the human? What are the elements which a person should be subject to? What is the common thread all should adopt in their pattern of behavior? So I'll say at the end of the day, the constitutional makers had a very constricted space for religion in the scheme of the constitution. If you look into Article 25 and 26 of the Constitution, if you read them, those two provisions, you will find that the religion, practicing religion, propagating religion, it is just as an island in the ocean of state policy, and it's an ocean of state policy, and there is an island of religion. But the judiciary, being the ultimate arbiter of the entire issue or the dispute, if you look into the judicial discourse in the Constitutional Court, the issue was always a challenge to regulation. Issue was always there, a challenge that statute is violative of Article 25 or 26. Here there are two aspects. One is the positive protection to a religion, or be away from the religion. State is to provide a protective umbrella to religion without any discrimination, or state should be kept away from religion to regulate religion or to see that religion is guided. So the issue arises that when you talk about the protective umbrella of state to religion, then you are entering into a dangerous territory and mixing the religion with the state. And that is what the human rights jurisprudence always made untiring efforts to segregate between religion and the state. But when you look into the Article 28, 29 and 30, you will find that political expediency or administrative expediency prevailed over the values of the Constitution, and they are charged with the allegation that the Hindu as a religion, Hindu as a religious community has been discriminated because the state did not involve itself only to protect, the state did not make all efforts to be away from their religion, and on the other hand extended the protective umbrella. And there, the justiciability of these issues, the Supreme Court, the constitutional courts in this country, they really had a due regard to the state policy on these matters. Whenever the state attempted to regulate temples and their properties, here I will say one aspect, that right to profess and propagate, right to profess, practice and propagate in this materialistic world, the property is an instrument, the wealth is an instrument. It's a relevant factor in the matter of propagation. Article 19, 1F, before the constitutional amendment, it was a right to property, was a fundamental right. Along with that, there was another article, that Article 26, C and D, Clause C and D, which provides right to property, right to acquire and maintain property as a fundamental right to religious denomination. And Article 19, 1F was available to the citizen of the country. When this constitutional amendment was introduced to repeal Article 19, 1F, the constitutional makers did not repeal Article 26, C and D. It still remains a fundamental right of a religious denomination to acquire and maintain its property. question of regulation of the temple and its property arose before the Constitutional Court. The first celebrated case is Shirur Math case in 1954. This case is celebrated. It's a very good case. A milestone case by the 7 judges bench of the Constitutional Court, which really did some wonders to the religion and protected the religion, the right to practice and propagate. But due regard to everyone, I will say that Shirur Math case, having taken a very constricted view of the word or term religious denomination, by reference to Oxford Dictionary, really did not do justice to the prevalent or existing concept of religious denomination in the country. The dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, Mr. Venkat Ramani will someday will tell us that Hindu Sampradaya, if you read the definition of religious denomination, what is defined in the English dictionary, it doesn't fit into the scheme of things of religion and culture. And that is what the third word picked up by the subsequent judgments. And that is what we witnessed its upheaval, rather I'll say, in Sabrimala case. When the court refused to acknowledge, except in the Hindu society, as religious denomination, and denied the right under Article 26 C and D. They refused to acknowledge that Sabrimala followers are the religious denomination in the strict sense. No, I'm not here to criticize or make any comment on the judgment of any judgment of the Supreme Court. But the practice in the Supreme Court was that the minority judgment was to be placed before the majority judgment, before the majority writes its judgment. This was happening as a practice. But the minority judgment have not been discussed in Sabrimala majority judgment at all anything. And both are the different streams. We don't know. They have reasoned out anything amongst themselves before delivering them. So the test of essential practice, essentials of religion were discussed in Shirur Math case. Because we as a student of law need to understand where the deviation had taken place and how this state control was reinforced and cemented in the subsequently. There are few things which I will point out in the short time. Then you will understand what has happened. In the R.P. Gandhi case in 1954, schedule what was followed. The law was in matter of essential practice, we had no issues at that time. In Venkatraman Devaru case, that's also 1958 case, we had no issues. And we saw, so far as we saw the really an emerging issue, we saw an emerging issue which really could set the trend for this country so far as religion is concerned. That's the case is Sardar Saidnath Tahat Saifuddin case, State of Bombay case 1962. Dawood Bohra community case. Wherein the person was excommunicated from his community and that gentleman claimed right to be buried at the places where the Dawood Bohra community used to bury their dead bodies. And there, really religion, really what are the essential practices of religious denomination, the Supreme Court discussed everything for the civil right of a person so far as the religious denomination is concerned. And the Dawood Bohra community's right to disallow the burial of the person excommunicated was upheld in that case. But there is a case, Dargah committee case, said Chishti Sat case. This case, in fact, in this case, the Chishti Sat had a reasonable case, as it had a case that they should be acknowledged as a religious denomination. Here I will say how the courts were adopted the discriminatory approach towards different sects of society, different religions of society. This case appears to be a case in a very innocuous way. You can say that this case was a case where the Chishti sect, Supreme Court disallowed the status of religious denomination to Chishti sect, but went on to decide the issue by assuming that they are entitled to claim the fundamental rights under Article 26. And that deviation, what I say, that judgment, you read carefully that judgment, following Shri Mutt case, following Devaru case, Saifuddin Sadhana case, they really went one step ahead to dilute the entire edifice of protection. The fundamental rights, fundamental right under Article 1926 C and D, the whole fundamental right, the way the Supreme Court interpreted this article the case of Dargah Committee case, the state regulation was upheld in that case. But what exactly happened in that case is, the one step was, Supreme Court went one step ahead of Dargah Committee case, because Dargah Committee case had taken a deviation. So you are a student of law, therefore my perception on this issue you need to know, so that you will further the debate on that aspect. Then the case was Tilkayat Shri Govind Lal ji case, Maharaj case, Nathwada Temple case it is called, 1959 case. In that case, I'll say the spirit of Article 26C and D was given a burial in Nathwada Temple case. That's what I am saying is a very short note. The way of putting the short notes on this issue, I am saying, to read that case, and you will understand the Nathwada Temple case was decided by Supreme Court giving a difference to the state policy of regulation. What we have understood that to acquire and maintain the property, there is a difference between class C and D. The class C and D have not been categorized in one clause. The language of the class C and D are distinct. And what they did, that is, they said, in fact, they said in those judgments, what I have referred to, that with barring practice and propagation, the other activities, the welfare or religious activities by having a property or whatever, it's a secular activity, and they have rendered the entire these two clauses bereft of any value so far as fundamental rights is concerned. And this case, this Tilkayat Shri Govind Lal Ji Maharaj case in 1964. And the deadline to this whole, in these two classes of the Article 26 was given in the case of Shishmal versus State of Tamil Nadu, 1972, and Pannalal, Bansilal Pitti case, 1996. It's a burial, total burial. And Kashi Vishwanath case is the classic case wherein the Supreme Court held it affirmatively that Vaishnav Samudaya will not be accorded, is not entitled to be accorded the status of religious denomination in the Kashi Vishwanath case. But I am leaving here one thing, that why I am saying so. The Supreme Court, in the case of Dr. Subramanian Swamy versus State of Tamil Nadu case, said one more important thing, that the state control or state regulation by legislative measure is only to remove the maladministration, is only for the period the state takes to remove the disease of maladministration in the management of the schools, management of the temple and its properties. And it has to be a temporary measure. But in the last 70 years, we have not come across a case where the legislature felt it expedient to repeal a law regulating this thing. Now, I'll take 2 minutes on one aspect, the Chart Farm management, Devastham Management Act 2019. Think India says that this act has been enacted to give back the temples to the temple, to the devotees. No, that's not the situation. The situation is very interesting. Actually, before this statute was enacted, there was an statute at UP Shri Badrinath Temple Adhiniyam Act 1939, which was amended in 1964. So the setup was that the temples will be managed by the elected representative of the area. So that was the statutory provision prior to the constitution, and in 1964 some amendments was made. But what exactly happened there in this state, because I come from that state, so therefore what exactly happened there? So there was a lot of litigation on this aspect, that who will be in the managing committee, who will be the trustee of the property, because managing committee is the trust. So there was a lot of litigation in High Court, went to the Supreme Court, etc. What exactly happened? Well, there was a lot of litigation. There's some wiser man had a divine wisdom. Let us demolish the entire structure. Let us not streamline or ease out the election process or management disputes. Let us have a streamlining. Let us do some streamlining on the administration, on the management issues. They repealed the entire statute and enacted this Charkham Statute, Devasthan Board Act, and vested the entire control in the management of the state. Entire management has been vested in the state. So, please don't be mistaken belief that it has been given to its entire bureaucratic control. And I tell you that we started from Shirur Bhatt, Devaraju, this case initially what I referred to, that the religious practices involve the appointment of the priest also. But the hereditary priest, appointment of those persons, the appointment of the temple itself, a priest itself, now has been taken away by successive legislations of the nation. And therefore, what I am trying to say, the state control have been stepped up, one in a phased manner, and the legislative wisdom, how we will be able to see a review. These different states have been incorporated, they have been legislated. In North India, in Uttar Pradesh, there is no legislation regulating the temples. So therefore, whatever has happened in the south or in Uttarakhand or wherever, the public awareness on this issue that the state controls how, if you want the state to be a facilitator, please minimize it to the extent, all possible extent, failing which it will be another public sector undertaking. And I tell you what has happened to these public sector undertakings in this country in the last 50 years. You decide your destiny. Thank you.